All right, so we should be coming over right now. Looks like it may even go.
It's loading. Come on.
Yeah, it'll make.
Oh, there you go.
There we go. All right, so we're gonna take this down. Okay, and record this to the cloud. Okay, make sure we're up. We are. All right, well, it's Wednesday. That must mean it's Whiskey Wednesday. All right. Well, it's a small but feisty crowd tonight, which is always good. That means that there's less of them to turn on us, Dave.
Oh, good.
Let me introduce everybody. That's right. We got a full day. We got a full panel tonight. So let me introduce first of all our guest of honor is Dave Willis. Of course, him and his brother, Will, the founders and chief cook, bottle washer, janitor, everything you can possibly imagine for Bully Boy Distillery in Boston. Well, like Dorchester, right?
It's equal parts Dorchester, Roxbury,
Yeah.
South End. It's in what's called the Newmarket District, which is a fancy name for a really shitty part of town.
In the Newmarket District, are we? All right, we'll go with that. Newmarket sounds great.
It's like they tried to rebrand what was a very unsavory part of town.
And you moved there, so it made it more
unsavory.
Right. So, and the spirits medium himself, Mr. Randall J. Bird, is here with us tonight. For very specific reasons, which will become evident later on in this broadcast. So, thank you both for being here tonight, and we got a plethora of Bully Boy products to go through tonight. So, first of all, let's just start this way: the history of Bully Boy. What did you guys had a lot of money and wanted to make a little? Decided to open up a distillery. What was the antithesis for starting a distillery in Boston?
So my brother and I grew up on a farm.
Okay.
And anytime you have a farm, there's an agricultural component.
Right.
So there were 70 head of cattle on the farm. And because of that, there was a lot of corn. We grew a lot of apples. There was 100 apple trees. And as kids, we grew up making cider.
Mm-hmm.
We had an ice cream stand. We were used to working with our hands.
Did you know Randall was the prince, the dairy prince? Talk about
agriculture. Was the New York State dairy prince, but we can move along from this.
I never forget to bring that up.
Light.
Yeah. And it's because you're talking agriculture. So, anyways,
right along.
you had go. Please continue, sir.
So cider was our entree into distilling. We started making cider and then hard cider. And then, of course, you heat up hard cider and you end up with brandy. And so we made really crude, terrible apple brandy for a number of years, really like all our early.
It always gets to the point, though. Is that what it was? It gets you to the point. It did its job.
For sure, because there was all sorts of alcohols in there that you would never want in a finished product, right?
Right.
Lots of methanol and acetone, and but we were doing it on a stovetop. This was just like a really crude still, and we did that for a number of years.
It used to be a third brother, but we won't get into that.
That's right. Yeah, he's no longer with us. And then we ended up saying we wanted to do this full time, and so we went and worked with other distilleries and learned how to do what we were doing on a very small scale to commercial scale.
Okay.
And so in 2010, we opened up in Boston. At the time, there was no other distilleries in Boston. Certainly, I think there were 2 others in Massachusetts. There were probably 400 craft distilleries in the country.
Right.
Now there are over 3,000. And we just started going at it. We were doing, like you said, we were really doing everything in the beginning. We were cooking during the day, we were distilling, and then we would load up the car and we'd go out and we'd pound the pavement and try and sell it. And then we'd go back and we'd distill some more. And we led with unaged products. So we were doing originally vodka, white rum, and this was the age of white whiskey. I don't know if you even sell white whiskey anymore.
There's still a couple out there kicking, because they're actually, what's the funny part, Randall and I were just talking about this, is because people are doing vodkas now, but they're not super
Clean.
yeah.
Stripped out,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they,
yeah,
they're
yeah.
not going to nth degrees of distillation,
Right.
and they're not filtering them to give it flavor. So there's not that much difference between that and white whiskey
Yeah,
or white
for
dog.
sure. Yeah. What was it? Was it Carlson's Gold? There was a vodka that came out around when we started, and it was delicious. It had a lot of flavor to it. It was a potato-based vodka.
Oh yeah, yes, I know
You
what
could
you're
actually
talking
hit
about.
it with
Yeah,
like
began with
a
a
little
K,
bit of
Carlson.
pepper.
Right,
It was
right.
amazing. But yes, so we were making white whiskey in part because it actually is, to your point, it's interesting to taste unaged whiskey and then taste whiskey when it comes out of the barrel. So it's instructive and it's an educational thing to do. But white whiskey had its time, and now and it kept the lights on.
Right.
We were selling. We needed to sell
You have to
products
make money to
immediately.
do these other things.
Exactly. I mean, that really funded our barrel aging, and so we started laying down whiskey. And in 2014, we released the American Straight Whiskey, which was our first barrel aged product. And then in 2017, we moved into a much bigger facility, and we went from 150 gallon still to a 750 gallon still. So it was a five-fold
Wow.
increase in
That's a big
capacity.
difference.
Yeah. And then the 150 gallon still became our gin still. So we separated our gin production from our whiskey and rum production.
Was there a problem with like also it makes it easier for botanicals to cross contamination and all
you
that
end
stuff?
up with ginned up whiskey because the oils, the botanical oils, will coat the still,
Still,
and
yeah.
you'll never get them out. And then we added a rick house, so we now have two different rick houses with over 1,000 barrels, and that's where we're at now. The bourbon was released in March, and then we actually have a bonded bourbon which will come out in March of 2025.
Cool.
And that'll be 6 years, totally different mash bill. The bourbon that we recently released is a malted wheat bourbon, and the bottled in bond uses malted rye in just a completely different mash bill. In addition to being
just on itself is just doing a malting of those grains is sort of off the beaten path, so to speak.
It is, yeah, I mean, completely. I mean, we can get into that, but philosophy for us is a big driver. As a craft distillery, you have to approach things differently than a large distillery would. I think it's one of the mistakes that a lot of small distilleries make is they simply try and emulate what the larger distilleries are doing, and you're never going to out maker's mark.
Well, that's we talk about that all the time. Is that why are you trying? Like you got to be careful. If you're making a bourbon because of your economies to scale, you have to charge more. There's no way around that. And if you can't top what's on the shelf at, let's say, and I hate to use the example, but let's say Jim Beam white label, then it's sort of one of those type of things is like, why bother try to make Jim Beam white label, do what you're doing, make something else, make something a little bit different, and tell people why it's different and how you made it differently.
Yeah, for sure. And the whiskey market, this, I mean, it has exploded. There are so many options on the shelf. And if you're just going to hew to the same mash bill, you're going to be doing 15% rye, majority corn, maybe a little bit of distiller's malt in there. There are 30 other whiskeys that fall within that same matrix. And so changing up the mash bill for us was a no-brainer. I mean, the vast majority.
Why malt wheat though? What was the theory? What was the reasoning behind that?
So it was a ton of trial.
I mean, I know you guys. I've known you for years. I know you're not doing that like, hey, let's be different. Yeah. We'll just do this. There's a reason behind that.
So we spent 2 years trying out a lot of different things. And actually in the year leading up to the release of our bourbon, we did a bunch of single barrel releases that we called it the experimental series, because these were all things that we had tried during this 2-year period.
Right.
And so, it was different It was different cut points. It was a different proof off the still. We started out at 145 proof off the still. We ended up at 129 proof off the still. It was different fermentation methodology, so different ferment times. It was using different yeast strains. And one of the things that we were tinkering with was trying out different grain types. And the malted wheat worked beautifully. It had this sort of like biscuity, kind of like fluffy quality to it. And malted grains tend to produce a lot of furfural. And when furfural oxidizes in the barrel, it gives this wonderful like toasted pecan note. So it was purely a product of trying out malted wheat and liking the way that it worked.
Okay.
And we did the same thing with malted rye. Again, we use in the bonded product, it's 24% malted rye, and then we actually use a separate malted barley as well, a traditional whiskey malt. So the bottled and bond is going to be a really fascinating whiskey.
Jason, you wanted to add?
I think we should start tasting some stuff.
Yeah,
Sure.
And continue this fantastic conversation. I think as we get into the first sample and we're talking about it, a lot of people hear craft and they think it's a matter of size, but it really is the crafting of what your particular style is and bringing that information that we're hearing here tonight to the people so that they understand what you're doing. But I didn't mean to interrupt anything. I just know that this
They're gonna get restless.
They're going to get unruly.
yeah.
If we don't start.
Well, I mean, yeah, but
Appreciate
this
that.
is sort of like the proof of the pudding, right?
Yeah.
We're gonna actually try this. So tell us the mash bill that we're
All right.
drinking.
So we use 60% dent corn. There's 30% malted wheat. There is 3% of a variety of malted barley called Munich malt. And then there's 6% distiller's malt. So there are a lot of like bready notes in there. Again, I always like pick up a toasted pecan note. There's a banana note as well. The banana classic, like Jack Daniel's banana bread note, that's isoamyl alcohol.
Mhm.
There's like a little bit of a spiciness too that the malt brings to the table. It's 95 proof. We use a different barrel a little bit of a different barrel methodology. We use a medium. Our barrels are toasted then charred, so we use a medium toast, and then we use a 3-char. Barrels are coming from Kelvin Cooperage.
Okay.
And then all our whiskeys are at least 4 years. This is around 5 years. Yeah.
Well, what do you guys think? So, I mean, this is really the sort of the first bourbon that's coming out of their distillery. I like it. I think it's got some good flavor notes. There's no graininess at this age with this bourbon. What do you think, Randall?
Yeah, I enjoy it. I think we're going to see a version of it a little bit later for the project piece that we're talking about. But I think that all the steps that you mentioned are time and energy that in a large production process would have to get kind of smoothed over or moved past. 2 types of malt, the toasting, then the char. It just takes time and attention, but it results in more layers of flavor being uncovered farther down the line. And I really enjoyed this one. I think that it was interesting because I kind of heard weeded bourbon and I thought it was going to go in one direction, but I really enjoy single malts and a lot of that spicy maltiness that 9% or whatever the percentage is brings to the table. So I really do enjoy this as a bourbon. So
it's met with pretty good results. I mean, people are buying. How are you doing?
It's been great so far. I mean, the channel fill is always like crazy.
Yeah.
And we're still in that stage. So you never really know what you have until
the second bottle
yeah,
is sold.
exactly.
You know,
Right.
everybody says that, like, you know, sell anything once, great. It's when the person comes back for another bottle of it that you know you've
Right.
made it.
That's
Right.
that's exactly it. Yeah. So we'll see. But so far so good. And um I'm really excited for the bonded as well. That's it. That's like I'm tasting it every 6 months, and it's really evolving nicely. So
That's great.
If you need any help with that, I'm sure
Yeah.
many of these people would come down.
Anybody volunteers?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I got a couple.
Any questions about the bourbon before we move on to the next sample?
You guys have any questions?
Yeah.
It is much spicier was the one of them.
yeah, the yes, yeah, the malted grain does that. You know, you think of like traditional wheaters, they tend to be more muted. You know, you really don't get a whole lot of spice at all. And it's different with you get more like a lot of baking spices with the malted wheat.
No, I think it's really good.
I always when I look at the grain, and if you're to do a purely distilled product, you have kind of the sweetest being corn moving into what I call the silkiest or this kind of smoothest, lightest mouthfeel being in the wheat, then to the spicy rye. But the spiciest of all grains, in my opinion, is malted barley.
Mm.
And so while you're talking about this as a wheated bourbon, I think that misleads your brain a little bit, because you're actually talking about more spice than necessarily like a similarly rye spice.
Right.
And so
The spice is
but
different than
just-
a rye spice, though.
it is,
right.
but I'm just saying
Yeah.
that you're thinking I'm going to get this smooth, silky kind of mouth feel, but you got some real kind of zings of flavor and that spice in there.
I think you
So-
get. I think you get the. I think you get the viscosity that's associated with rye in this. I mean, with wheat in this.
Yeah.
I think you get the viscosity, but I don't think you get the necessarily the. I think you get more grain characteristics than you do barrel.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and a lot of times for me, well, anything that's the wheated part of like a wheated bourbon, you get sort of that silky texture. It's a textural thing, but I think you also get a lot of the barrel character comes through with wheat. I think this you get some of that thing, but you're getting the spiciness from the grain itself.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah,
not the barrel.
The malts in general too are a little chewier. You know, they do tend to have a little bit more viscosity and like that kind of grainy, you kind of sink your teeth into it.
Right. And I don't want to get like, because a lot of times we associate graininess with young whiskey because you're tasting just the distillate. I don't think you're getting that with this. This is a mature whiskey.
Yeah.
I don't want to mislead anybody in saying,
Right.
I'm tasting grain. I'm tasting the type of grain that you're doing, which is great.
So this is our American straight.
Yep. That would be, it zigzags.
Yeah.
You got it?
Um,
There's a tutorial that goes with the tasting, the tasting
It's
notes.
just like,
There's so many.
this is so this was our first whiskey, and it's funny. Ryan and I were having this conversation. The mash bill is 45, so 45% corn, 45% rye, 10% malted barley. So it's not technically a bourbon. And at the time, that was intentional. We really were trying to avoid coming out with just another bourbon. But it is amazing how if I had just added 6 more points of corn, the marketability of a bourbon versus an American whiskey is like night and day. Even though
use barrels on this too?
so no, we
Are you using
this
still
this
virgin?
was a virgin barrel.
Okay.
Yeah, so there are some.
So that's
American
really
whiskey.
the only thing that's the only thing that connects
mash
this
bill.
from its mash bill.
Yeah.
Or even if you could have done rye, you could have done 6% rye
Yeah.
and you would have had
Yeah.
a rye.
Yeah.
I like that you didn't do that, by the way. I'm probably one of the few people out there going like, I really like that you just did an American whiskey because I think those are underrated whiskeys, and unfortunately it's a tutorial to get people to understand them. But once you do, it's like, oh man, this is like really good.
Yeah, they there's just more flexibility, you know,
Right.
like you can do whatever you want. And so tasting notes, it has a little bit more, the spice is more rye spice than
Right.
malt spice. It's 84 proof, so you're losing, 9 proof off of the bourbon, so it's going to be a little softer.
Mhm.
Um,
I love the finish on this.
yeah, it's nice. I mean,
Yeah.
so what's great, the American whiskey now, this is a 6-year whiskey, just because we've had whenever
More time with
whenever
it.
we're aging,
Right.
we're not releasing everything that like even with the bourbon, if I have 30 barrels that are over 4 years, I'm setting half of those aside and I'm letting them ride. And then when they're 6 years, I'll start to trickle out more of them.
Take like
and
half
then-
of those,
right.
and then but holding back,
Right.
and letting some of the stuff get older
Right.
and older.
I mean,
Okay.
it's again, there are small.
Are you selectively doing that, or are you just sort of like, okay, these are ready, I'm just gonna let go, and you really haven't tasted the others? Or
No, I taste
everything?
yeah, I mean, it's one of the biggest things that I do is, because we don't have the benefit of a column still to generate consistency. I mean, a pot still is just there's so much variability every and like when I'm making my cuts, I have it pretty well dialed in, but there's just with a pot, there are just more things that are different from distillation to
It's
distillation,
less exact.
way less exact. And my batches are smaller. If I'm Buffalo Trace and I'm dumping 100 barrels, there's going to be any inconsistency is going to get ironed out by the sheer volume
Right.
of the dump. Whereas I do 10 barrel batches. And so I have to go through and I have to taste all those barrels and I have to rebuild the batch
rebuild
for
your flavor
consistency.
profile.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I have a sort of a matrix that I follow. We have I learned to blend from someone who actually used to work on the antique collection at Buffalo Trace, and this is how she learned to do things. We divide up our barrels into top note barrels, and then we have soft barrels, and then we have silky barrels. And I will taste all the barrels and I'll separate them. I'll dump them into separate receptacles where they'll sit and marry together, like kind with like kind.
So it's almost a Japanese side of thing where you're making blends of blends.
Yes, exactly. Right. And then
so it looks like an inverted pyramid.
Yes.
Mixing these, and then those mix into these,
Yep.
and then you finally have your final product.
That's right. You almost like are creating these flavorings.
Right.
And then I blend them together. They marry again for at least 24 hours. And then I'll proof them down and they'll sit again. And so the whole process takes a little over a week. But that's how we create consistency is through. So to answer your point, I'm not just dumping any barrels that come due and then letting a bunch ride. I'm picking and choosing, and then the remainder will continue to age. And then when they're
do
ready,
it again,
they'll go through the whole process
right.
again. All right. So
what do you guys think of the American whiskey? So underrated, I think.
Well, and I think that was your original point. We were talking about how if you slap bourbon on the label, push it out the door, you don't really have to explain it. You don't have to do whatever. It's going to kind of sell itself or get picked up by people who are going to rep it quite easily. And then you all of a sudden put the brakes on it and everybody's like, what? What's this American whiskey about? But to speak to the craft nature and the process, you're beginning to see that where you can set a dial and forget it at the larger distilleries, the column distillation does the heavy work, the large volume of barrels averaging out the high and low spots to get a consistent product. This is actually done the complete opposite way. To get consistency and flavor, you have to really do a week's worth of work, whereas they will set it and forget it because they just have it dialed into one thing. So I do think it's worth the explanation. And I think that we're just now starting to come into consumers and people who want to hear and understand that process. But it had to have been tough in the beginning to try to get this out on the market or do whatever.
Yeah, no, in the facility that we have now, it's not high tech, but it's so much farther,
Along than
so
you
much
started.
better engineered than the original facility. It was fermenting in plastic totes, and it's sanitation, which is a huge part of what we do, was really challenging in plastic, and there was no temperature control, so your fermentations were all over the place. And now, we have temperature controlled fermenters, and we have a rigorous sanitation schedule, so we don't have to worry about bacterial infections, which in the early days, it was like every 10th fermentation would spoil.
Yeah.
And that's money out the door. And that's what
Yeah,
people don't get.
yeah.
That's a lot of money out the door. And that's the things that can
For
set you
sure.
back or put you out,
Yep.
you know.
No doubt. So, okay. This is almost a separate conversation. This is our
Well, wait, before we
the
go on
third
there,
one,
do you guys better understand American whiskey? Like what they're doing for American whiskey now? Do you like it? Yeah, it's great, right? I think it's great. This is one of my favorites.
Yeah,
So,
American whiskey is, I mean, I always think of it
you know,
like,
especially I like this. I like this
thank you.
this mark a lot.
It's sort of a default category. It's like a basket that
Yeah,
contains
it's like a
everything.
basket of default, but
Yeah.
if you don't do it right, it stinks.
Yes.
But if you do it right, it's great.
Yeah. Now, if you do it right, there's so much flexibility, and you can really flex your artistic muscles and not be like hemmed in by the requirements. So we came out with a bottled old fashioned. I think this was 2016, and
Love the nose on this one.
it was somewhat ahead of the curve as far as ready to serve goes. And we came up with it just because we were we were batching it like in gallon jugs and giving it to friends, because we have an old fashioned recipe that is heavy, bitters heavy is the way I would describe it. It uses a lot of Angostura bitters. Actually, I get 50-gallon drums of Angostura bitters, which is pretty amazing.
Don't drink that straight. You will not want to drink that. It's,
I don't know. Angostura,
it sounds neat in your head until you actually try.
Right.
Because somebody's like, that has alcohol in it. They sell that in supermarkets. You can drink. I go, if you can drink a whole bottle of Angostura bitters, go right ahead. You'll never get there.
When you file a formula with the Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau for bitters, you actually have to prove that it's non-potable. That one of the requirements for bitters is that you can't consume it on its own.
On its own,
Maybe
right?
You get it's so intensely bitter you just gag. But we get these drums of it, and I always love to think about the Angostura distillery being like, who the fuck are these guys up in Boston buying freaking drums of bitters?
Because they often sell it in little.
I'm trying to find the little tiny bottles of it.
Yeah,
You're trying to buy a 50-gallon drum.
A 3-ounce bottle lasts a year. But we do, we're batching up 330-gallon batches of old fashioned. And so we came out with the old fashioned, and then it did well. And so then we came out with a bottled Negroni. And then we recently came out with a bottled Manhattan as well. So we kind of have built out this ready to serve lineup, which is sort of we divide our business into different categories. There's the ready to serve category. There are the whiskeys, which I do exclusively now. And then the Amaros we can get to, but I'm a Amaro fanatic, and Amaro and whiskey have become kind of like our hero categories. That's
your vanguard. You're a vanguard
we
for it.
Leaned into.
Yeah.
So the old fashioned,
I got to tell you, this has been one of my go-tos because I'm lazy, very, very, very lazy. With mixed drinks. Matter of fact, I go by the moniker, if I can't mix it in 2 minutes, then I don't want it.
Yeah.
Mix it in a minute. I always say, if it mix it in a minute, great. If it doesn't, I ask John to make me something.
And if you got to buy, if you got to buy four bottles, forget it.
Right. So this has been like one of my, because I think this one's actually really good. And believe it or not, I think this beats a lot of places I've gone into and ordered an old fashioned, and somebody's made me an old fashioned, and it isn't this good.
Yeah.
Depending on where you go. There's some good people that do amazing old fashions. I don't want to take anything away, but I can get this consistently done the same way every time.
Right.
and it tastes identical to me, and that's what I use.
So what's been surprising to us is we actually do a lot of on-premise business with this. So we sell it to a lot of restaurants
Mhm.
that are doing just that. You know, they like to
It's
do a lot of
consistent.
this stuff, but they're kind of down below, just dumping it into.
Yeah, there you go. Listen, I'm over here doing this. The guy's table that's having the steak is like way over there.
Right.
He
Right.
just sees me doing this.
Yeah.
Some marbles in there.
Yeah, throw some
Exactly.
I still gotta chill it down so you can still do the shake.
Right. Right. But they like it, you know, especially coming out of COVID where no one could hire
Right.
bartenders. You couldn't get any staff. It was really nice to be able to rely on the cocktail being consistent,
Right,
and being good.
now
So-
I know I have some like old fashioned aficionados in here. Some of you just old, but old fashioned aficionados. What do you guys think? That's good, right? I mean, what's that? That's very good. I love it. I think it's a really good one.
and
And
I
it's
think that-
locally made too. I like that fact too.
I like the consistency factor too, because a lot of times I'll go to a particular bar or restaurant and you get it one way and you go back thinking it's going to be the same.
Different
So, I
bartenders
mean,
on.
yeah, and it's just a completely different experience. So
Yeah.
if you do like this flavor, I think it really delivers.
Yeah,
I think we've talked a little bit about the distillery itself, and it's definitely a working distillery. It's not like a show place. But are people able to experience that, or
Can they go to
set
the
up
distillery?
appointments, or
Yeah,
be able
so
to see
we-
this?
we have a cocktail bar on site, and yes, it's open from Thursday through Sunday. We run tours on Saturdays and Sundays, and yeah, it is very much a working distillery. The smells are, you know,
Yeah.
you've been there. You walk
Yeah.
through the door, it's potent.
It's a distillery.
A little bit of everything.
Yeah.
Sourness, baking spices, alcohols of all different types. You know, if you walk in when we're doing tails, I mean, bourbon tails smell like dog farts. It's like one of the most
Oh, you sold me, sir.
one of the most it's one of the
Sign me up. I wanna
rancid
go.
smells. And
What day is that on? I'm just marking it down. Don't go on.
That's every
Don't go on.
day.
Oh, okay.
No, I mean, talk to my kids about it when I come home. I just reek. But yeah, you get some good smells, some not so good smells, but it is very much a working distillery. The cocktail bar is behind glass, so you don't have to drink an old fashioned while smelling dog farts.
Well, there's a positive.
And there's nothing more satisfying than drinking and watching somebody else work.
Right.
I have to say
That
that's
is
a
exactly
pleasure that I
right.
enjoy.
Yeah.
But one of the things I wanted to mention, because we were talking about the old fashioned, was years ago when we first visited, there was an old fashioned, or a version of a cocktail in a barrel up near the ceiling with like a little spout that they would barrel age the cocktail and then serve it. But is that still the old fashioned, or has that changed?
So
Or do you still do it?
the cool thing about that barrel, it's the same barrel. It's been there since 2017, but it's probably had, 15 different. And so the old fashioned was in there for a while, and then we did a Saz rack.
Okay.
We've done a barrel aged Negroni in that barrel, and what's neat is every batch that we do picks up all these flavors from previous batches.
Right.
It's almost like a Solera.
It is like a Solera, totally. But spanning wildly different flavors. So it is really neat. Yeah, it's up towards the ceiling. It's an old 53-gallon barrel, and it's got the copper spout that runs right down, and they just open it up. And the cocktails that come out of there are delicious. They've like oxidized over time, and they've transformed into something that was completely different than what went in there.
And that's it. We were actually talking about this earlier because we were talking about the thing we just did, which was Roxy, and somebody's like, "Oh, you can just swirl Moxie in a glass, throw it out, put rye whiskey in there, and that'd be the same thing." And I go, "No, you do not understand barrel aging at all.
Right.
You don't understand what went into it and how it changed, because that's the same thing. It's going to change. It takes up a whole new character.
Yeah.
It's not just an additionals. It actually morphs and changes.
The biggest one of the mistakes that craft distilleries originally made was they started using these like mini barrels,
Mhm.
because the view of barreling was very one-dimensional. The feeling was, I need to get as much barrel influence as quickly as possible
Rapidly.
without considering the fact that oxidation, which you can't speed up, even though people are constantly trying to do it,
Can't cheat time.
takes time, and oxidation is more than half of aging. I mean, it's a lot of the flavors that develop in the barrel are the product of the interplay between oxygen and the liquid in the barrel, not the barrel and the liquid. I mean, that is an important piece of it. But
Well, yeah, I just wanted to add, a lot of people hear oxidation in the terms of wine or what's in your bottle at home, and it generally can be negative because there's no additional mutation or changing of the flavor congeners or the molecular structure. It's just oxidizing in some somewhat negative way. But any experiment where we've done half-filled barrels for aging has turned out to be superlative. It's just been delicious because that oxygen in interacting with the actual elements that are in the process of changing is really where you're getting all this delicious and crazy kinds of flavor. So oxidation, even when you're talking about it, I like to try and like define it in a barrel or in a changing situation versus the static.
It's still
Like,
living.
yeah,
It's still a living.
It's
It's a process.
evolving
It's a process.
yeah.
Once you hit glass, the only thing oxidation can do is start detrimenting the whiskey
To deteriorate it.
and deteriorating it. In a barrel, that's a different. It's a different thing.
totally different. And you know, you get evaporation too,
Yep.
which is a different animal. But yeah, I mean, you know, all the lovely congeners that evolve in a barrel, they need oxygen. For those chemical reactions to take place, you need oxygen present. And so the more, and oxygen will penetrate the wood. The wood is, I'm sorry, this phone is driving me nuts. This,
It's your brother saying you're saying
I know.
stuff wrong stuff. Stop telling them.
Well, I just want to point out another quick thing. You had mentioned these smaller barrels. The belief was at the time that you have less liquid to more wood, you're going to get the wood influence more, but it was really not, as you were saying, a full understanding of it. And also, the other thing that I found interesting was that the quality of a good cooperage, like Kelvin, the one that you're using, which is pretty much top of the line cooperage, makes a huge difference. And a lot of the smaller barrels, for lack of a better term, are kind of like a novelty type barrel. And so they haven't worked out for 200 years how you char, handle, season, and condition the wood. They're making a barrel that's smaller to meet the smaller requirement, but they really haven't got the top pick of the oak of the process in the kiln or the air drying or whatever processes they're doing. In fact, they were doing a lot of kiln drying, which was releasing another kind of negative flavor into the wood as well. So, yeah,
Well,
but it was
a
a misunderstanding. It was a learning curve because people started out that way and they go, "I've got this. This is how we're going to make more flavor," and actually kind of shot themselves a little bit in the foot.
Yeah.
So,
and it was new wood, to your point. You know, all the barrels that we buy, the staves have been at they're seasoned for at least 12 months. So they leave the wood out in the elements, and a lot of the tannic qualities in the wood leach out over time. And when you're making small barrels from fresh wood, it's like wood on steroids.
yeah.
And you're right. A lot of those barrel producers they were kind of like novelty barrels. You know, you could buy them online, but distilleries were using them to age liquid that was going into bottles, and it was it unfortunately gave a lot of the craft whiskeys on the market this reputation. You know, it was like, if you buy a craft whiskey, it's going to be super woody. There's going to be no integration between the barrel and the liquid. It's going to be like wood and grainy, unaged liquid. Right. Which is,
that's what we talk about, like when you get that graininess and it's so evident.
Well, because you're pulling all the color out, but not necessarily the
flavor.
Excellent flavor out of it.
And there was a reason why, you know, the 53 is the standard. It's the one that's been used the most. It's one that has the most history. It's the one that has the most experimentation of, and also you saw even though there's variations in barrels, I'm not taking that away. It is the one that you know the most about for the longest time.
Mm.
So you know how to react to it.
Styled
Maybe a
in.
small
It's
barrel would be
styled in
great
at
if you
this
did this and this and this. You maybe get 100 years on that, and all of a sudden you can make a great, 5-liter barrel or whatever. I've heard from a lot of people that they actually, one of the ones that I heard a lot of people want, they like the 30-gallon.
Hmm.
Those were ones that a lot of people really like, but no one's making them. So again, you run into the same problem. What are they using to make the third? Like, you know what I'm saying? You just get a 53 standard, you know what you're getting.
Yeah. And it's like, no different than buying a bottle of bourbon from a whiskey distillery that's been around for over 100 years. You know that they know what they're
They
doing.
can't make it 100 years if they didn't make something right.
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 But the cooperages are the same way, Independent Stave, Kelvin,
Yeah.
these cooperages that have been making barrels for a long time. I mean, Independent Stave does a ton of research on barrel technology, and they're the ones that really are on the forefront of trying different things out.
Right.
And
Seeing where they got.
If there was a better barrel to be had, then Independent Stave would have stumbled upon it because
right. They just do too much research and development on that, not to have.
Exactly.
Right.
So do you want to move on to?
Yeah, because this is, to me, is very interesting.
We geek out on this, but all these people like turn on us at any moment. Let's get some more liquor.
Eyes glazing over. Yeah. So
I was shocked when you came out with an Amaro.
Yeah.
I was happily shocked. Don't get me wrong.
So
because like an Amaro made in Boston.
Yes.
I was like, this is so cool.
I like a lot of our products, like the origin of this is a passion for the category itself. And I love Amaro. There are certain products that, while they're different categories, it makes sense that a producer would make two different categories that are seemingly different, but do have a lot
in common. Right.
Like gin is a distant cousin of Amaro. And I mean, it's why you see Scotch distilleries making gin. There's a craft that goes into gin, the same sort of craft that you would find in whiskey. I see that, and oftentimes, the two products work well together. So Amaro and whiskey.
Hence the we just had an old fashioned.
Exactly.
I mean, you can say it's a bitter, but
yeah,
it's in the same family.
But Angostura bitters, you add sugar to Angostura bitters, well, it turns into Amaro. So for those of you who don't know what Amaro is, Amaro originated in Italy, and there's no set definition. It's not like whiskey or gin or rum. And so any of the parameters around Amaro are purely a product of historical precedent. What do people expect from an Amaro? And the defining characteristic is bitterness. So all Amaro.
Randall, you're an Amaro.
Are bitter.
That's right. Deeply Amaro.
Don't be bitter. The sun will come out tomorrow.
I like that. Yeah. Wow. Nice one. Is that yours?
That's fine. The fact that I admitted that, what that was.
So they're bitter. To balance the bitterness, they're also sweet. And then they are herbaceous. And the thing I love about Amaro is the world is your oyster. You can make Amaro with anything. Not anything, but anything that grows in the ground. So the way you make Amaro is you usually take a neutral base. So, think vodka, and you take botanicals. It could be gentian root. It could be cinchona bark. It can be cassia bark. So barks, flowers, chamomile, lavender, yarrow.
But even like some of the spices, like
spices,
anise, we can do anise, and you can do
anise. You could do clove.
Cola nut is another one.
Cola nut, sure. Eucalyptus leaf. So we use Szechuan peppercorn, and you steep the neutral base in all of these different botanicals. And then after 4 weeks, you filter them out and you sweeten it, and you have an Amaro. The challenge, of course, is finding
Making it make sense. And make it
balance. It
taste
has
right.
to make sense,
Right.
right? I mean,
it has to be balanced too.
I always say that like a good Amaro has all these individual flavors, and all the individual flavors are sort of giving up their own personality and creating this new stew of flavor that is sort of like, you're not going through it and being like, oh, that's clove and that's yarrow. It's like, God, what, this smells delicious,
Right.
but I don't know what I'm smelling.
They all come together.
They all kind of fuse together. And there are no what I call flavor bumps where you get these like, I'm smelling like too much clove, or wow, there's like a ton of fennel in this. Everything is in balance. But the reason I say it's a cousin of gin is gin starts out the same way. You have a neutral base and you throw in botanicals. The difference is with gin, of course, is you then redistill it, and all those botanical oils travel through the still and they flavor the liquid. Whereas with Amaro, you're just filtering it out. You're leaving out the distillation step. So with this Amaro right here, which is the first
So
Amaro
number 4
that we made,
went up.
Orange blossom is one of the defining flavor notes. And I just got finished saying that you're not able to taste any individual flavors. I do like to have like one or two hero flavors in the Amaro where it is like a flavor bump. So grapefruit and orange blossom are the sort of like hero flavor notes here. It's not intensely bitter. And with Amaro, there's always a spectrum of bitterness. So Campari is technically an Amaro. Campari on the spectrum of bitterness is like over here. It's super bitter. It's just a kind of a vehicle for bitterness. This is much less bitter. And because Campari is so bitter, there's a ton of sugar in it because it would be unpalatable without that. So if you have a less bitter Amaro, you can avoid having it be super, super sweet. The next one is a really interesting one. So this is a subcategory of Amaro called Rabarbaro. And Rabarbaro is defined by rhubarb root.
Okay.
And rhubarb root has this smoky, earthy, kind of like cola quality to it.
Yep.
We also use black cardamom, and black cardamom is really one of the most interesting botanicals I've ever worked with. It smells like barbecue on the outside, and then when you break it, it's really mentholated on the inside. So it smells like menthol on the inside of barbecue on the outside. So
it almost ends up like getting with the two together and stuff. Almost ends up getting almost this side of cinnamon.
For sure.
You know what I mean? Like it's not cinnamon, but it's just the outside of cinnamon. You're like, oh, is that cinnamon? No, not really. It's similar, but it's not.
It has almost a root beer quality to it. Again, it's that kind of like cola root beer type of quality. This is great.
I love this one. This is really nice. This is my first time having this one.
Oh, is that right?
One. Yeah.
So both of these work beautifully with whiskey. They are like tailor-made for whiskey cocktails. So, you can even use it in like a 2-to-1 ratio, 2 parts bourbon, 1 part Amaro. I make Manhattans with it. It just, the herbaceousness and the sweetness just really marry wonderfully with whiskey.
What do you guys think of the Amaros? Is it Amaros or Amari?
That the number of times I've had this conversation. Yeah.
Was it? Oh, I thought somebody actually had an answer for me.
You see both.
Okay.
I sometimes I hear, usually I've heard Amari.
Yeah.
It's usually someone who's trying to sound smarter than they are. I always just say Amaro. I think Amaro is
it's
singular.
It's many Amaro.
Yeah, I think that's right.
All right.
So
I don't know. It's just delicious.
Yeah.
How's that?
Yeah,
Zach,
I had a couple questions.
Yes.
So you're getting a neutral spirit, and then you're introducing these flavor. It goes in clear.
So and I should, there's one caveat. This Amaro is actually made with a hybrid base. It's 75% neutral grain spirit and then 25% white rum. So
Okay.
like a neutral molasses base.
So both they start clear.
Mhm.
Are they at a relatively high proof strength, and that changes or comes down, or do you try and target what you're gonna
So
be bottling at?
I steep at 80 proof. Some folks steep at a much higher proof.
Get a higher extraction. They're trying to get a higher
They're
extraction.
trying to get a higher
Yeah,
extraction.
but that often doesn't work.
It doesn't, and especially since bitterness is actually water soluble. So if you're trying to extract bitterness, you actually
at a lower
it's
proof.
better to lower the proof. So I start out at 80, and then this one ends up at 58 proof, and this is at 60 proof, which is on the higher end of Amaro. A lot of times you see Amaro in the like, it can be as low as 20 proof, and then, you know, it goes up to sort of like 40 proof.
Yeah.
It tends to be somewhere in that range. So it's for that reason, it's a nice aperitif, you know, it's like a good a lot of the ingredients that go into Amaro aid in digestion. So it's a digestif, technically.
Right.
So you have it after a big meal, and
And these are actually really
Two
nice. I mean, you
different
could drink,
colors.
yeah, but you can drink these like you could drink a small amount of these like in a cordial
yeah, a little
glass.
snifter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a little cordial glass and
for
be
sure.
fine.
But I'm seeing two different colors. Are they arrived at naturally, or is that something that you?
The rhubarb root is super dark. It has like a pitch
Yeah.
color to it. So both of these are natural. There's no caramel coloring in either of these. Oh, with the larger Amaro houses, you do
Consistency.
see some coloring.
And often not brown, sometimes more reddish.
red.
Kind
Yep.
of, yeah,
The red
orange.
bitter family.
If you remember from your question of the week, Randall, you remember that the red used to come from an insect.
Coconut.
The
Coconut.
beetle,
Yeah, they don't do that anymore. But
So we have an Amaro Rosso, a red bitter that's coming out on June 3rd, and it uses cochineal.
ooh, I'm very interested.
Yeah,
in
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's a bug that they
You're just working out the bugs, aren't you?
right.
Grind up the skin. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I heard Campari stopped using it
Yeah, they did.
because they wanted to appeal to like if you're vegan, apparently
right.
you cannot have cochineal. But I think it was just a way to save money. Cochineal's way more expensive than FD5, which is what Campari uses now.
I'm interested in trying that. It's going to be great.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Now, tell us about the next one we're going to.
Okay.
That's the rum.
This is a really fun project for us. So, yes.
Yeah. What about? Go ahead. What do you use?
It's cane.
Cane.
It's just a regular cane sugar. It's a good question. You can use, you know, like agave syrup. Honey is delicious. It's expensive to use. It'll definitely change the flavor. Yeah, for sure. Honey. Yep. So these are both, they just use regular cane sugar. Yep. So this is called the Rum Cooperative. This rum right here is part of the Rum Cooperative series. And there's this interesting thing going on in rum now. Rum is, and every year, I swear to God, people are like, this is rum's year. You know, like rum's gonna.
They've been saying
We
last
made that
20 years.
10 years ago.
Yeah, longer than that.
Every year since we started, it's like that's been the storyline. The great thing about rum, if you're a producer like Bully Boy, you have all these amazing rum producers. They all produce way more than they sell. And so you can buy amazing old rums for super cheap. It's like where bourbon
Because it wasn't their year.
It wasn't their year.
So I get advice.
But it's like, you know, what was happening with bourbon in the 80s and early 90s, where there was a lot of great old juice and it was accessible and you could buy it, you can bottle it. That's where rum is. So we have a contact. He's an old friend, and he has these connections at a lot of different distilleries. He speaks Spanish, which is super helpful. So we tasked him with going around and finding 12-year rums. And together we created this blend. And on the back of the bottle, you can't see it from here, but we have the blend that we arrived at. And we list the country of origin for each rum. We're not allowed to list
To the distillery.
but
In some
sometimes
places, there's only one.
I was just about to say,
Yeah.
the one from Trinidad, you start to, Jamaica is a little more challenging because there's a bunch of rums there, but so Panama is 45%, Dominican is 36%. These are all 12-year rums. We had the only rum that isn't 12 years is 10% of the blend is our 8-year rum. Trinidad, that's 8.1% of the rum. And then we got this really high ester, super punchy Jamaican rum. And that's
they used the pit, right? They're in the
it was
pit,
like
right?
1% of the blend, 0.9% of the blend. Super, super like bready, and it's really intended as a blending rum, like it's supposed to be used in a small percentage. So
goes a long way. One little bit goes a
really long way. So this was volume 1, and then we came out with volume 2, and then we came out with volume 3.
We have volume 1 upstairs, and I think we have 3.
Okay.
We have 1 and 3, I think. 2's gone.
1 is the most kind of like stone fruity, sort of rich. 2 was the funkiest. It actually used a Mexican rum, which was pretty unusual. It had some it used an agricole. Agricole rum tends to be much funkier.
Agricole rum, if you open up a bottle of agricole rum, to me it has that same flavor when you open up a can of black olives. Can of black olives, and you open it and just smell it.
Yeah.
That to me that's very similar sensation.
I'll have to try that.
Try that.
Yeah.
You used to put them on your fingers, and you know what I mean. Used to.
But agricole.
Some of you still do. I know. You don't have to kid with me.
It's grassy and super funky. It doesn't smell. If you put a molasses-based rum next to an agricole, you wouldn't even
know it was there.
You wouldn't put them in the same category.
Right.
They're wildly different products. So the Rum Cooperative has been a really fun project for us, and a way to, we missed the train on being able to buy super old delicious bourbon, and
we're gonna ride this one for as long as we can.
Well,
no, because I mean, it's the art of the blend. You get to experiment. You get to do something a little bit different than what you normally get to do. I get it. And what do you guys think? Good. All right. So
a question, I think, over here.
What's up?
Yes. Yeah.
So let me just, for everybody at home, he's just asking the second and third, your base rum drops off quite a bit. The reasoning behind that was percentage wise.
So the answer is simple. We wanted to make sure that all the rums in these bottles were old. And we had 8-year rum, but we didn't have enough of it to spread it out over volumes 2 and 3. And I will say, from a flavor profile perspective, our rum is most closely aligned with volume 1. Volume 2 was was kind of a funkier product, and our rum wouldn't have worked well in that. And then volume 3 was intended as kind of just like a more classic Caribbean rum. That's really the flavor profile. It kind of has like some brandy notes, and again, our rum just wouldn't have been a good match.
You can't force it.
Yeah.
It's if it fit, it fit. If it doesn't, you move on.
And we really
Right.
built volume 1 around our rum. We wanted our rum to work as kind of like a centerpiece in the flavor profile. Yeah.
Good question. That's a good question.
Good question. Okay, so now that we've gone through everything and we've sort of, you got one left. It's number 7, and we sort of talked your ear off about all the stuff. Did we lose anybody? Everybody fall asleep? No, you're still here. You're still here with us. Great. Because we get
Here comes the knockout.
Because here comes the one that's going to knock you out. So Will and I were talking. Dave's brother, we're talking and said, I really want to do a project and I sort of want to float this by you. What do you think? And he said, well, I like it. Let me talk to Dave, see what his thought is on it. And then, Randall and I had originally started talking about this. So it was all going in. And we just wanted to listen, we're both local people. I have to tell you, local is going to be what's happening in the economy, what's happening in the world of whiskey and stuff like that. The people that will affect most will be local people. So we're like, no, we want to make sure that these guys are around, we're around. We want to make sure that sort of happens. And how do we do like a local project? So we sort of came out with like something a little bit different that we could do together. And so I gave Randall a barrel and I said, okay, go deliver this to Dave and let's start a new project. So this is where I'm going to hand it off to these guys. I said, he's like, well, do you want to be there? I go, no, go pick a bourbon and then we'll start there. And because it's going to take a long time for this it may take short, it may take longer. But as you guys know, when we start a project, wherever it leads us is where we go with it. So we're always going to put out a great project. We did something at Sagamore that should have only taken 6 months. 3 years later, it came out. Okay. I mean, because we can't tell the whiskey what it's going to do. We can lead it down a path and say, okay, but now we're tasting stuff and seeing where it's going to come out. So this project is a little bit different where you got one of our barrels, and I'll let you guys take it away.
Well, I'll just start out by saying we wanted to pick a good base bourbon in order to do this project. So the first and most difficult task is, of course, going down and tasting all these delicious samples. And I want to point out that anyone who can make the trip and see both the tasting room or the distillery, it's fantastic. You put a lot of thought and effort into the way it looks, not so much in the industrial space we're distilling, because that's going to be dictated by what you have there. But the way it's laid out, just there's a lot of really cool features that it's a real treat if you can get down there and actually be able to sample these at the distillery is going to be a huge added value.
You don't have to go to
what you're
another
doing.
state to enjoy something that's really cool.
But we pulled out several samples and we went through them. And so what's on your tray in number 7 is their barrel of Bully Boy Bourbon, which was barrel number 1043. All right. But this,
well, you didn't screw that up, Randall. That was
this
good. That's
you've
good.
added, you brought it down to proof down because it was and this is the actual sample directly from the barrel before anything has been done with it at 127.76 proof. What you're tasting is 90. I'm not
95.
Sure.
95.
Yeah, 95.
Yep.
So water has been added because in this taste setting, we want it to be more palatable. And
I think you get more
sometimes
flavor, like you guys said.
yeah,
You get more
you're going to
flavor.
find some of the nuances. So this is our starting point, although this has been proofed down slightly from.
I mean, I think it's a good example to going against number 1. If you have any left, I know you don't, but this is sort of this is number 1. Number 7 and number 1 are akin at the same proof strength. But this is a single barrel. Right. You're getting a number 7 now. So what do you guys think of this? Yes. Well,
This
go.
is the process.
There's a whole process involved. This is just this is the base we're starting with, which we feel is a pretty, which is a very good bourbon to start with.
So anyone who's been to the finishing school class will kind of understand what this is. But of course, I had to make an elaborate display of what the project
Why take
is.
a simple project and make it?
Why not
more
just do this
simple.
on paper? But
Let's make it more
so
complicated.
if you follow this in a linear fashion, this is what we're going to do. We have the origin barrel, unaged, unchanged, just as it came out of the barrel. It was then put into a barrel that we've brought down that had staves that were already inserted in that barrel to make another project that we had that were 10 various flavor staves of a bottling that was called Encore. So those staves were shipped to us separate, cut into smaller staves so that they could fit through the bung, where normally they would just take the end cap off of the barrel and then insert them the staves into a ring into the liquid that is a wheated bourbon, and then seal the whole thing back up and put it into a cave. So this jar represents the 10 or so staves cut down into and now put back into that barrel. That barrel was filled. When was that?
Last week.
Yeah, we
right?
dropped off the barrel last week, and so sometime
Filled it
between
the
then and
day after
now,
that. Yeah.
they've filled that with the liquid. And the first sample that got pulled was what was immediately pulled. And then with samples, if you were to read the label, it says week 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, progressively, because at some point we're going to pull 200 ml samples, label them with the date that they're pulled, but every 2 weeks. And at the end of the project, while this started at 127 point whatever, we will probably sample these on a machine to tell you what the proof strength is changing. But we'll be able to sit down in a class at the very end and show you in 2-week slices of time how it's developing and changing before it gets to the final bottled product. This is just a representation of the final bottled product. It has not happened yet, and this will be something different, although it'll look like it's in this type of bottle.
No, what Dave doesn't know is he has to rotate the barrel to keep those staves moving. They're not floating, so we
No,
want to keep them
One
moving.
barrel I can manage.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. We won't give you 10.
But essentially, we wanted to showcase and work with you. You have an excellent palate. You're developing flavor and taste, but we wanted to see how it's developing and changing over time. Because one thing I've noticed in my work is that it is not linear. You think it's going to go, and then it just keeps getting better and better. Sometimes it goes wackadoodle. It drops off the face. You're like, oh my gosh, this is never going to
We
taste good.
screwed it up.
Comes out, comes way up again. Generally speaking, it's moving upwards towards better, but we're going to have to figure out what that time is based on how the barrel and the staves inside it are interacting with what we think is already a good tasting product to start with. And then at some point, a determination will be made at when we're going to stop the additional mutation or aging process, whatever you want to call it, the finish on it. It's not, finish isn't really a good term for this, because that typically means that you're putting it into like a sherry or a port barrel. But when it stops and changes, and then at that point, it will be bottled, and then we will come back and then go through this as a class, because we can talk all day long, but most people have only seen the final product. If you're talking about, for example, famous whiskeys like Glenmorangie, who has different finishes, you're only seeing it after they've determined it is this for you. But we want to show how it starts, how it changes, and then ultimately the bottle that will be for sale at the very end of the whole path.
What do you guys think? You want to go for a ride?
And I just totally talked over you, Dave,
No,
but
that's
like
great.
anything that you want to try and explain
I
about
was
it.
trying. Well, you may or may not be able to mention what the staves are, what type of wood the staves are.
That's going to remain a secret.
Yeah. Okay.
So anyone who I think one of the things that is difficult about these types of projects are, we obviously want to support your brand, and we want to be respectful to other brands that we may be interacting with or whatever. But at the very end, I'm sure we will be able to reveal some of our secrets.
Yeah.
But instead of
reveal some of the secret sauce when if it works out.
It's almost kind of nice not knowing.
Right.
I mean, because if you know, it starts to influence
what you're thinking.
You start to read flavors and aromas into the whiskey,
or psychologically lead yourself. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
we're not gonna do enough of the samples to do a set. We're thinking of doing it as a class.
And
So-
that's why they're the 200 ml bottles, which I believe we can charge you for.
You don't need to.
But typically, if you're doing a sample not for sale, this would equate to 3 or 4 bottles that they would not be able to sell.
So
So
we want to minimize that.
But yeah, I think it's really interesting to see how it unfolds, because when I first started doing projects like this with another brand that I was working with, I swore I knew how it was going to turn out, and I was very wrong. So part of the journey is like a little bit wackadoodle, a little bit fun. It goes into odd corners and directions that you don't expect. And that's part of the excitement. And the final say is you have to make a determination of whether it can taste of that. Now, I've cut 10 holes, which would be essentially 20 weeks. But if it takes longer, and then the other thing that I don't
Or
want,
not.
this is not any kind of diss on your distillery, but like when I'm around distilleries and rectifying areas, there's always so much going on. You got your gins, you got your this, you got barrels, bottles, samples, little tiny labels. So what is important for me is that I put it into essentially a tray. You're working on a particular table at your distillery, and then you have to clear that table for the new gin project, or you're going sorting through the grain and the sack or whatever is happening in and around the distillery. The whole thing moves as a unit instead of 5 bottles
It's
on this
trying to keep it
table
organized,
for
keeping it organized,
because
there's no way not to organize it.
yeah, it helps you. Like, I'm not saying this is going to help you. It helps me to have it kind of collected into what the arc of the project is.
If you've ever seen Randall's car, you'll understand why.
Yeah, exactly.
It needs to be neat.
Well, no, I mean, it's just I think that you might have at some point multiple projects like this going on, and so how do you keep 100 identical looking bottles all with brown liquid?
Yeah.
Separate,
Them
even
straight.
with the label, it's you could squint to make a mistake or whatever.
No, I need
So
more of these. This is great.
yeah, so this is why it's a little bit more elaborate, but you're going to be taking this to the distillery and using it. This probably won't travel. This is just kind of just to showcase
Representation.
the staves inside of a barrel, which is obviously a glass bottle. So
You know what I always think, we were talking about this earlier, I think is always shocking to people is everyone thinks that more is more when it comes to finishing barrels. Like, well, if it was good at 1 year, it's going to be even better at
right.
3 years. And what's great about this is some people are going to taste the final product and they're going to say, actually, I really liked it at week 6.
Whatever
Right.
it was.
You
blew it.
You blew it.
You blew it.
Yeah.
You overdid it.
That won't be the first time somebody said that either, by the way.
But people start to learn, and a lot of it is individual preference, and
Yeah.
so you start to dial in what your own preferences are, and that can influence how you make buying decisions in the future.
Right.
The overdoing.
We always do this and the same thing. You got to do the same thing. There's certain things that you produce at a certain time. You go, man, I love this. This is so great. Well, Randall and I've tried barrels that like, this is so, I love this and stuff. It's not going to sell. We could buy the barrel. I'm going to sit on it because there's only like 10 of us that will like that.
Right.
You know what I mean? So you always have to go with something that like people are just getting into it are going to like. People who have developed palates and like certain things they're going to like. You're never going to please everybody, but you sort of have to split that. You have to start to split that up so it's hitting the most people.
And this, the overdoing it tends to be a bigger issue if it's like a finishing barrel, port barrel,
right?
Armagnac. I mean, this is
It
effectively like
dominates it.
extending a more traditional aging process, albeit with different woods, which is really cool. So it almost, instead of changing the flavor profile, it'll like make it more complex. And I'm
starting with something totally different than what was really in the barrel, which I think is even cooler.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, it's like so like what Randall says, almost like a legacy, but it's different.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to end up different.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Well, the key that I would like to see is that the core flavor, which is delicious, we'd like to maintain that, but
Right.
we would like to see how it has evolved or has kisses of these additional flavor instead of being overwhelmed.
Right.
The whiskeys I don't like are things that you're alluding to, like a port bomb or a sherry bomb, where it's just so overly influenced by the wood that you've lost the original characteristic of it.
You don't get the
Right.
distillate
So,
flavor
yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
But
that's
this is
yeah.
the project. This is part of the fun, and so
You get to go
we're
along
going to
the
send
ride.
you back home to the
I'm-
distillery with
I'm-
all your homework to do. And
I'm
yeah,
psyched. This
Yeah.
is fun homework.
yes.
This is good. Hey, I want to thank you for coming tonight. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
And I'm
This
going to
has
see
been
your brother
great.
tomorrow morning,
Thank
which
you.
is really
Thank you,
weird.
Dave.
I've never seen both of you at the same time anymore, which is really weird. Anyways,
We still get along, don't we?
yeah, well, that's okay. I know brothers. You'll get along forever. Thank you all for coming tonight for Whiskey Wednesday. Thank you for joining us. I'll say everybody goodbye on Facebook. If this will become It's the Liquor Talking podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, such as Spotify or whatever. Look for It's the Liquor Talking, and you can get it on there, or you can come back to Julio's Facebook page and replay this. Thanks everybody on Facebook. Thank you, and